Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, to our more closer to home abode filming location. The cigar lounge that we have been filming at is going to be occupied by its owner for a little while because of a house sale and that kind of stuff. So we don't know how many months that'll take to free that back up again. Hopefully not too long. But it's kind of nice to get outside. At this location, I'm not allowed to smoke cigars, so I'm actually in the middle of the afternoon too, so I don't really feel like smoking right now. Because I will probably smoke quite a bit this evening while watching movies. So today I thought we would talk about one of your favorite subjects, the moon missions, and really the psychology around it. And we're going to talk about various pieces of evidence that are hilarious. Because I was at a smoke lounge here locally in Costa Mesa, and they were playing Apollo 13, just straight up on television. And of course, if you guys could get a live feed of me watching Apollo 13 in front of these guys, I know that you would be laughing the entire time. But what was actually cool was, there was a couple. Let me show my card. Hatchback here. There's a couple scenes, of course, where, people in the room are starting to kind of ask questions. And a couple things that were funny that was they said, well, we had them flat guys here, referencing flat earthers. And they were like, we didn't even go to the moon. And I'm looking at the guy, I haven't said anything yet, but he knows me. And I just kind of went, he goes, well, do you think we went to the moon? I'm just like, I'm smiling, I'm looking at him, and I'm shaking my head. I said, no way. I said, we've had a couple, deathbed confessions in the last several months here. People saying they worked on the set and that sort of thing, which it needs to come out. But, what's kind of funny is if you watch a lot of the YouTubes made over the last 10 years, there is a fair amount of Caltech students that have been trying to reveal this with their heavy portfolios, with their heavy IQs that are validated in the system by talking about the Apollo capsule that can't land with its butt end forward. It's got to have its nose cone like a tip. It's like a bullet forward. But as soon as you start hitting atmosphere with one of these things, it starts rolling in the atmosphere. There's no way that the thing would stay stable. And that is one of the funniest assertions of the entire program, is that you would have a capsule shaped like a bullet that's going to come in backwards. Anyone who's ever been a gunsmith or a gunslinger, if you just take a bullet and throw it, the tip always goes first. And with this, parachute packed in, supposedly the tip of that thing is as dense as bark. It's kind of a joke that it wouldn't be super top heavy. And just imagine what would happen to your body if you're spinning at anywhere between 17 and 25,000 miles an hour. Because apparently, say you're coming in at 17,000 miles an hour to the Earth's surface, but you're gaining this extra push. In their world, the phenomenon pull, but you're gaining this extra pressure to come towards Earth. It should start slingshotting you right to the ground, right? You should go over whatever your base speed is, because you're getting a much better vacuum pressure towards the Earth. Vacuum in their regard, in our regard, a negative pressure with a bunch of ether pushing behind the ship and slamming it into the surface. But what's interesting is I was at lunch with a friend of mine, and the subject of the ISS came up. And my buddy goes, oh yeah, you don't think the ISS is real? And I said, well, there might be a tin can up there, but what's in it is obviously not what they say it is, I think. And for people who have recently gotten concerned that they believe too many conspiracies, I appreciate that. But to go back out and look at all the ISS footage and say, oh, this looks so real to my uneducated mind, it must be real. I can't believe I stepped off the plank of actually considering it's not real. Well, to anyone who thinks that the internal zero-G stuff inside the ISS is somehow proof that it's real, you need to go see a 1995 movie with Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton called Apollo 13. 1995. They could completely and utterly simulate jumping in and out of tubes inside the service module. So, they had it down in 1995, people. But here's what I want to focus on for at least a brief second during this episode. Because I know that any one of you who have done your research, and at least you know that there's enough questions that believing the official story is no longer possible, which is always a big deal, right? You know, when you deal with any one of these secret moments in history where they've done something really nefarious, from JFK to 9/11, all that kind of stuff, you just need to find the one thing that doesn't make sense, that could never have happened because science but really just science won't allow it to occur. Or someone wasn't in the same place at the same time, or they were. There is a mechanism where patriotism develops into sort of this, how do I describe this? I've talked about it as being a person's identity. We know that for a fact, right? So, if you threaten the claims of any one of these events as being anything other than what it was buttoned up to be, so that the person about to talk to you doesn't get butthurt, right? Then they're going to come after you. They're going to say something to you in a way that right out of the gate, they're trying to intimidate you. And it could be that they really, really, really want to get into a physical altercation if you simply go over that edge. Or in a lot of cases, they just simply tell you, I have attached this to my patriotism for my country and my identity as a human being. And so the tone of my voice, the velocity of how I speak, is going to let you know. Don't go there. I can't handle, which is really funny, I can't handle you challenging this situation. I've already made up my mind, and I would rather go to maybe an altercation of some sort, whether it be the assault of a statement or a battery of a fight. They're willing to go there. And what's actually interesting is the big tough guy needs a dress. That's what he needs. He needs to put his dress on so that he realizes, I can't handle this. I'm a little girl and I can't handle this. I'm not an intellectual. I'm actually a little boy who happened to grow up inside this body. And now I got wrinkles and some kids and some bills. And I'm not going to let you talk about that thing. Whereas a true adult will ask the question. The guy last night was an adult. But I have definitely heard, and then my friend yesterday was an adult, like asking me, being patient with what's going on. And then the other thing is that if you have some juice with these people, right? Meaning they know where you've been, then they're willing to listen to you for a little bit longer. Which is why, just like the Aesop fable, you don't want to be the boy who called wolf. You don't want to be someone who's sensationalizing absolutely everything that you've ever heard. Or you don't want to also be the person that's like, oh, and this, and this, and this, and this for hours and hours and hours with someone, unless they're very eccentric. Because in the end, they'll walk out of that place going, that guy believes everything. Everything that they're ever told, they believe it. And so you have to pace it. And what's actually very interesting, if you're stuck in that envelope, is to say something to the effect that if someone's asking you to reveal conspiracies to them, you want to take a step back, put your Sam Elliott hat on, and just say, this is a very dangerous thing to go down these paths, because there's a whole lot of the world that isn't the way that you think it is. But to learn it all at once is very dangerous. So what is the most significant thing to you that could maybe save your life, make you more successful, solve a mystery so you can sleep at night, sort of thing? But I'm watching this Apollo 13 thing, which I haven't seen that movie since it came out in 95. Obviously, it's a brilliantly made movie. It's quite perfectly cast. Ed Harris runs the command center. Clint Howard, Ron Howard's brother, is one of the operatives at Houston. And again, you got Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton. We just lost Bill Paxton. Horrible. There's some great lines in the film. There's some unbelievably amazing special effects of these guys floating around inside the capsules that I dare you to find any reason to doubt those shots being absolutely real. Although, because Hollywood said that they weren't real, you're like, oh, well, those aren't real, of course. But these over here, these are totally real. When they look exactly the same. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I've been around CG stuff, television and film, both as an observer and knowing people that actually contribute to it and do the designs for it and that kind of stuff for 25 years, man. And then what I missed in the 25 years prior to that, I picked up through my friends on, first projects like Tron. And so when I see something absolutely flawless in 1995, and then I see space station stuff in 2022, well, it may be real. But saying that, oh, see this lady giving you a tour throughout the capsule, see how real that looks, therefore I think it's real. That is not your proof that it's real. It could be. It could all be legit. But a friend of mine yesterday was quoting a lot of SpaceX stuff. And what was really hilarious was that it's what we all used to do. You fanboy. And I think that there's a benefit to fanboying as long as what you're fanboying actually could maybe increase your personal intelligence and maybe even take us to the next level, right? You become the person who went from computer programmer to rocketeer and you end up developing something better. You go off and get a degree in chemistry as it relates to explosives and you come up with something better. That's fantastic. But so he was talking about, he had memorized a lot of the records of the launches from SpaceX. Totally cool. I mean, it's just cool. But I told him, I said, because he's talking about, the SpaceX, the Starship actually taking off from California and landing in Texas, and that being the methodology by which they actually transfer them from one place to another, which would be cool. And he did help me clarify, too, because I said, these fuselages are not the big cost center of launching. And he said, but you're forgetting about the engines. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. So it's saving the engines that is really the big value statement of these things coming down. But I told him, I said, look, I'm unaware of any pedestrian that's ever seen these boosters come down backwards. Every single time it ever happens, it's either raw NASA, aka SpaceX cameras on the ground, or it's an employee of SpaceX filming it from a distance where they go behind a stream of trees. So you don't really see the impact point. So, I mean, again, if it were to hit the ground and blow up, then that's one thing. But I guess, again, for me, it's like, just invite a dude like me to see it. And I'll totally blow it up. I'll be like, this is the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. It does look like they're pulling it off to some extent. But when I mentioned that thing landing on a barge, my buddy just went, yeah, totally, and went on to the next thing. As if there's no immediate question of, really? I bet that's bullshit. Come on. The physics behind landing on a barge is nuts. And even if you did get the rocket to land on one of these barges, just the next 2 seconds of it flipping and twisting in the ocean could send it into the water. What I think that we would like to have, if you feel like you're on the side of more truth, is to have more people in the world believe truth than any type of deception. And I'm even starting to think that, it used to be that we would grow up and you'd watch a movie. I mentioned this recently, but you grow up and watch a fictional thing on television or in the movie theater or on a stage, and you had a complete grasp. That was a fictional thing. You're buying entertainment, right? You could even play a video game and you knew the tank inside the Atari 2600 is just a few pixels of data. But today I think that there's becoming this metaverse blurred line between what is real and what is fake. And the metaverse is here to put you in an augmented reality state of being. They know that us old timers, and I would say even Gen Z up, we're never going to adopt headgear. But imagine if you told every child that's born for the last 10 years and after that this is what you do. You put this on. In the book 3001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, where he ceremoniously destroyed every previous franchise book about the monolith and what was going on, he talked about this situation where the citizens of the world would shave their head and put like a Merlin cap on from the 1981 Excalibur, where it's the form-fitting cap. And it would obviously connect to all the sensors in your brain and give you some sort of Shadowrun world inside your head. Now, what's really funny about that is that the only thing that needs to happen would be to talk to the visual cortex in the back of your brain, because the rest of your brain is just your sensory input on your hands and all this other stuff. It doesn't give you a vision to have it all over your head. It makes you wonder when a scientist finds out that there's a soul, because they can find out that there's a soul with a very simple series of steps, which is to map the entire brain, to poke and prod the brain. Even in some Joseph Mengele kind of thing, you would find out that even touching everything inside the brain, you could create some sparks and stuff in the eyeballs, of course, and you could injure the person's ability to do things, and you could maybe get them to have a memory about a ham sandwich when they were 12. But overall, the overall essence of what is a human being does not exist in the brain. It is what passes through. The brain is a trumpet of tubes, and your soul is going through it. And it's going from head to toe, all through your glands, bouncing off everything, right? So at the end, when a scientist actually puts instrumentalities all over human form and is trying to sense out what's there, and they come up with snake eyes, nothing. Then their next logical thing is to say it must be a platform outside of what I can observe with my electron machines, right? Anyway, there's this plateau that you start to discover if you're a moon truth person. And it's a fascinating thing. Think about it, Let's just say you're a person who's done your research and you've realized that we didn't go to the moon. And you've gone through your Kubler-Ross anger, denial, negotiation, acceptance, and you're at a beautiful point with it. Now, regardless if you have anyone around you, this is still going to happen. But what ends up happening is, the more that you share this with other people, or at least engage in conversations where people are interested in having that conversation, you become an amazing psychologist. You become an amazing sociologist. Because in dealing with the information and observing how people reply to it, you realize there's all kinds of functionality to keep out negative perceptions of things. And it's an amazing byproduct of being a person who happens to understand something. And so then you can take that little bit of knowledge, that kernel of behavior, to all the other sectors of your life and realize that people tuck things away. I had a family in my hometown that had a very peculiar family. Some members were really kind of almost psychotic and weird. I wouldn't say psychotic, but really just not home for lunch, man. And the family just goes into denial about this person's dysfunctional brain. And to the extent that the guy had kids and stuff, he was hurting his children by being crazy to the point of crying. And then the wife would just look the other way. Instead of holding the guy, she doesn't have to do it in front of the kids, but, as soon as you get him alone, like, hey, you just totally destroyed our young kid because you made him promises, and then 10 minutes later you forget that you made those promises. And these were like things that the young child wanted to do more than anything on planet Earth that day. And the father comes up and says, do you want to do that thing? And the kid goes, yeah. And then he just fucking drives off and goes someplace else. Meet us there, blah, blah, blah. And so when you see the mechanics of an otherwise very functional family, but they have these little nuances in them where denial is just a methodology of existence, it's stunning. It's super stunning. And when you deal with getting into a conversation, this would be, we'll get back to moon specifics in just a second, but I know that you've suffered the slings and arrows of what I'm talking about, But the ideal situation would be that you're about to have a conversation about true stuff, and someone really wants to know, and you going, okay, I want to do a psychological profile on you, but I can't just tell this person, hey, what about your childhood? What about this? What other things do you believe? Da 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 da, because that's going to tell me how you're going to respond. Some of the simple questions you can ask if you're trying to get this kind of information. This goes for anything that's conspiratorial. Just say, well, have you ever heard anything like this in the past? What are your thoughts on it first? If they go, well, of course we win. Anybody who doesn't think we win are assholes. It's very important to hear those things. But again, there's something called God syndrome, and God syndrome is defined poorly in the world. And I'll give you a better definition of what God syndrome is and how it catalyzes into a person's existence. It's very simple. You become an expert at something A, and you make a ton of money at it, especially. You start getting everything you want in life, both the tangible and the intangible, meaning a lover in your life, a husband, a wife, or whatever. You have decent kids or whatever, or maybe at least you spawn them, right? And that gives you this sense that you're winning everything that you go up against in your life. You're just a winner. And so, of course, you think I could learn things and master things. And the more intense the A thing is, whether you're a brain surgeon or a physicist, and things are working out, you're not just decorated. You built a CERN Hadron Collider, and regardless of what that thing is, you were actually able to suspend protons in a beam of energy. And through just modulation, have them slam into each other. And then your Sigma 5 algorithm, just discerns all of the dust. Okay. Then someone mentions the moon to that person. But that person negotiated all of their thoughts about the moon mission by the age of 15, maybe even by 8. And it just warms their heart. Plus, they're part of a big governmental system. So the government never has treated them wrong. And so they go to the defense. Well, I've never known Bill to lie. Why would Bill tell another lie? You mean to tell me Bill lied about this thing? Well, Bill's never lied to me. And Bill is the government. Now, I did not finish Apollo 13 yesterday because they shut the place down probably about 30 minutes before the movie was over. But it's obviously well done in terms of I don't know if it's pseudo-history or whatever. I don't know how much of that stuff would have ever been documented, but there was one telltale sign that it was fake that I had never noticed before. It's very basic. If, for instance, there was a true Apollo 13 situation, which again, the official documentation on the explosion that happens on the service module is still not documented to this day beyond a paragraph of maybe, what if, could be terminology. There was nothing on the outside of the vehicle that should have exploded under any circumstance. What they should have said, it was hit by debris from space. That would have been a wonderful thing. But they know that if that ever happened, the whole vehicle would probably erupt into a bomb because it's going to go through both sides. But they could have said it was a nick or something like that from some other piece of debris. No, they just decided to leave it in the confines of the mind. And you know what? Everybody on average believes it. But if you have 3 astronauts in space inside a service module headed towards the moon, and there's an explosion outside, probably the last thing you would ever do is start broadcasting this information to the press to talk to everyone else and freak everybody out. Because one, you're trying to save face. If you're a normal organization, you wouldn't want to be like, we're Disneyland and we got a weird ride situation going on. A bunch of people are stuck upside down and they're screaming and crying because somebody got injured too. I really doubt that Disney would want it in the press live. You want to secure the situation, either get everyone rescued or worse, right? Someone, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And then report the end product spun so that you save face. NASA was pulling a scam, right? Apollo 13 was all about making sure that people who called in and complained for Apollo 12, will shut the F up and be excited about 15. So the second this thing starts having issues, it's broadcast live outside. And if someone wants to say to me, oh, that's ridiculous, it was 69, 70, it's probably 70, yeah. And, the press was different and all, it's like, horse shit, man. They understood completely through Vietnam, especially how to embed cameras inside really intense situations with all kinds of stuff that happened from the assassination of JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, and RFK. They know exactly what they're doing. If it's on television, it's meant for you to see. And I'll give it to you in an example, an analogy. Let's say you're taking your brand new. Well, it depends if you're a lady. You can write in this analogy differently. But you're a guy and you've got the sweetheart of your dreams, and everything's going great, man. You want to get engaged, you want to get married, and you think she's going to say yes. And you're taking a car from point A to point B for a really special weekend. But it's late. For whatever reason, you guys got off work late, and this is going to be the majestic travel up to the hills or whatever for a ski vacation. I know this is taking too long. But the car has got to go up into some weather. But you, the dude, the driver, you're not driving too well. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're taking some liberties. Maybe you're just so happy you're just an idiot. And you got a scenario where the car's going to fly out of control. And for a split second, it looks like you could die. Completely. But in the last second, you either miraculously, luckily save the car, or your skill sets kick in and you save the car. Now, let me ask you. If you're NASA in that scenario, as the dude driving the car, the people are this young lady that you want to marry and be a part of, right? Would you rather her be awake during that situation or be asleep during that situation, such that when the car stabilizes perfectly, right? It's a flying, twisting out of control, maybe goes off a cliff, lands perfectly, and now you're on a smooth highway, and there's just at the windshield, there's no sense that there was any danger or anything. Straight out of a movie, out of a Michael Bay movie. And the woman wakes up with her eyes, oh, honey, are we almost there yet? And you just got the steering wheel and you're like sweating beads of sweat, but you're like, yeah, we're almost there. And then she goes back to bed and you seem like you're amazing. Or would you want her to be awake during this huge thing where it almost kills her? Where at that point, the car lands and keeps going. There's a 50-50 chance she's going to be okay and not blame you for that situation, or she's going to notice that it was your negligence that got both of you almost killed, and that she could see now the future of the drive home and other drives that you could get her killed because you're a frickin' moron behind the wheel. That's why NASA would not be broadcasting Apollo 13 issues on the press, because it makes the audience lose confidence in NASA. What the hell's wrong with you that you have some random thing on the side of the service module exploding? And that you don't have any redundancy inside the system for CO2 scrubbers and oxygen supply. Now, the other thing that I don't know is, and we may never know, and if any of you do know, please let me know. They have these miraculous batteries inside their suits and these miraculous oxygen tanks, which again are large thermoses inside the backpack of these suits, right? That by Apollo 17 can last 25 hours per astronaut, including scrubbing oxygen and providing new oxygen. And of course, batteries that just last forever, right? So, I don't know, because I know they had their spacesuits on, and supposedly this limb goes from underneath the service module and comes around and turns and attaches to the top of the service module. Miraculously all by itself, with nobody in it, because there's no way to get in it. People just forget these things, right? They just forget that these things need to occur. But were the backpacks of these astronauts in the service module, or were they in the limb? Because if they were in the service module, then all of this drama inside Apollo 13 didn't need to exist. All you needed to do was just open the kit up and turn them on to open oxygen Basically, like turn your suit on, but keep your helmet off. Everybody would have been okay. Now, we know why Hollywood didn't do that, because they're trying to create a dramatic situation. I salute them 100%. And again, some of the lines in the movie are just priceless lines. You know, there was one where they turned off the ship and they said, now we put our hands in, or now the ship's in the hands of Isaac Newton. I thought that was great. Meaning, wherever we're headed is where physics is going to take us. I thought that was brilliant. But now what's interesting is I'm sitting in a lounge and I'm talking about some of the evidence, right? And I said to them, because I had this conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, I said, well, once you figure out that rockets don't work in space, it'll all make sense to you, the skepticism. And he says, well, they do work in space. I said, no, they don't. I said, you think that because the fire pushes on the cone that somehow it's communicating with a lack of fabric in the universe as dictated by the engine type, right? The engines that are on rockets communicate with atmosphere. That's the only thing they communicate with. I mean, that's the only thing they can affect or use to affect themselves. But as soon as you leave an atmospheric layer and you go into the vacuum of space, according to NASA, right? Non-recognition of ether. But when it comes to a rocket that's using fuel, ether doesn't play any role directly in that formula, right? So I'm talking to my buddy, and I can see he's going through the Kubler-Ross thing, and he'll get there maybe. But I thought, there's got to be an easier analogy to describe what's going on with rockets in space. Everyone can understand. And I had a little epiphany on the way home yesterday, because I had a nice 1-hour drive. And I thought, what if you're in a pool of water? Like a pool in the back of a house, right? And you were a little miniature dude, and you had a really nice water motor. The motor has a fin in it, and it turns, and it can move you inside water. But now we lift you out of the pool, and I'm holding that little turbine motor in the air. And I say, okay, turn that. Well, it's not moving anymore. Like, yeah, well, of course, it's supposed to work in water. I mean, you could turn it 1,000 RPM and it might start moving air. But it's not even made to be aerodynamic, but it works perfectly in water because that's a water engine. So here's an analogy, and you could do the pool version of the water supply, or you could do kind of a fictitious version of it. The fictitious version of the water supply is that you actually imagine a sphere of water in the air, and your little boat is flying around inside the sphere with this little propeller engine. If that's hard, just think of it flying around inside of a pool in water space, liquid hyperspace, okay? And it builds up enough momentum, because it's possible, that it's heading towards the surface of the pool or one of the edges of the sphere, and it hops out. It hops out, and it's not in a Earth-like surface, it's in space, so there's no other additional gravity of any kind. Okay? So here it goes. It's now escaped the water. Let's say it goes fast enough it can escape the pull of the water itself. And so now it's just flying in space. But it's turning this little water turbine in space. Well, even a little kid knows that's not going to affect nothing, a vacuum in space, because it's a water motor. It only works in water. Now, if it goes to another sphere called Mars or the Moon, potentially, it could actually start working if one of those spheres actually has atmosphere. According to the Moon, it's a rock. It doesn't have any water on it because it doesn't have any atmosphere. According to NASA, Mars supposedly has 1% atmosphere. I think it's all bullshit. So as long as the information is arranged properly inside your head, you can see things. And this is what was happening last night. I talked to my buddy yesterday for lunch. And the subject of the ISS comes up because of SpaceX. Because he was bragging about the fact that SpaceX keeps claiming to have sent dozens and dozens of dudes in these ridiculous, your mom made a Halloween suit looking spacesuits to the space station. I mean, again, it's just like, it's a way of patting yourself on the back by talking about their accomplishments with no scientific knowledge of anything. But if you memorize the mission reports, then you have this faux belief that you actually understand what the hell you're talking about, which is hilarious, but very natural, right? So what are the odds that I come home, I hit my cigar lounge, chill out, watching some barfy football, and I come back, and then I go back, and it's Apollo 13. So then the dude starts talking about these people that were in there. And what was funny was he was actually minimizing the claims that we didn't go to the moon by saying that they were flat earthers. Right. And I'm like, well, I'm not a flat earther, but I tell you what, we didn't go, But I explained to him some basic footnotes of my background with this whole thing, with the guys that told me that we didn't go, who worked at NASA, very decorated dudes, at least one of them. And if that guy passes away in my lifetime, I will reveal who he is, but I don't want to do it before he's there. I got a neighbor coming in. But when I mentioned to him that rockets don't work in space, he solved the issue very quickly. I mean, it was a matter of like a couple seconds before he goes, oh, right, because it's in a vacuum and nothing works in a vacuum. What would you be pushing off of? He says that right away. Then a few minutes pass, and I talked to him about the fact that when the LIMS returns the astronauts to orbit, that it's just sending them straight up, but the service module is going around at least 17,000 miles an hour, if not 25. And as soon as he hears that, he's like, oh yeah, that's ridiculous, right? Now get this. 5 minutes later, he asked me if we really did go or not, using, again, the flat earth people to dispute the fact that maybe we did go, and it's just because idiots said we didn't go, we did, right? So think about that. That's what's fascinating about this, right? So he has two instances of proof that he instantly solves for himself. He immediately knows that these two things I've mentioned are basically indisputable, that rockets don't work in space, and that if you were to send the LIMS straight up, it doesn't miraculously gain 17,000 miles an hour in any one direction. And we have a few little things, and I mentioned a few other little things that he completely bought into. But 5 to 10 minutes pass. I think it's more like 5. And he comes back and says, so these dudes were in here and said that we didn't go. Do you think we went? Now, let's sort of like paint a physical analogy of this situation. The dude had so many years of sedimentary belief stacking up on each other from probably his childhood all the way up, that he actually couldn't accept the proof that he agreed to that these things are actually a physical impossibility. I even mentioned rope memory because they talked about transferring the service module program over to the LIM. But you got rope memory, right? It's going to be 100% compatible with what is in the computer for that particular mission in that particular vehicle, right? So the service module most likely can't hold what's in the LIM, and the LIM can't hold what's in the service module. The other big thing, and I'm sure there's a lot of details, and I have not done a gigantic dive on this. I may actually at some point in the future go do a deep dive and rip this thing apart. But you have a much bigger engine on the service module, right? You just look at the photograph. In order to fuel that thing, you have a much bigger thrust. You just do. And that's its purpose, right? But they were talking about using the engine on the LIM, which we know has 10,000 pound thrust. Much smaller, probably 50% of what's in the service module. So what's interesting is with great writing, like great, what I would say MacGruber, MacGyver stuff. You got a paper clip and a rubber band and a battery, 9-volt battery, and now you're going to make, a supercomputer. I understand that when a writer or a group of writers can make it feel good, and they put music on it to serenade your dopamine so that you believe that something's actually taking place. I get it. I have been there as a kid. And again, when I was really, really young and I watched, Superman fly backwards around the earth, Christopher Reeve in the first movie to save Lois Lane from being swallowed up by a crevice in the ground. For a couple of years, I actually thought there was some general relativity situation where that was possible. Hilarious. because it was made so emotional and it worked inside the movie. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that, the question starts to reveal itself, which is, are these people that they can't, come across the Rubicon, are they defending the fact that their government wouldn't lie to them? Or are they defending the fact that they love the story and they don't want it to be untrue? And I'm going to suggest that they could care less about the government lying to them. I don't think there's any person alive past 18 that doesn't know the government lies to them. Some kids learn it in the Sudan and Haiti really early, that the government just lies, and is not to be trusted until they are completely removed and a new situation is put in place, right? No, these people are defending their very being. This has been added to their index of I am man, therefore these moments give me greatness. Now, what's really interesting about it is that I think that people do derive, and Buzz talked about this in one of his admission appearances, but with the moon, every human being on Earth runs the likelihood of actually attaching that to their being. The moon, men went to the moon, I'm a man, therefore I'm great. I don't think I have seen anything that reveals the idea that if Ty Cobb becomes one of the greatest players of baseball, or Babe Ruth, Verstappen becoming one of the best F1 racers in the world, that anyone is rooting for that guy or those guys because they feel like they are one of them. Might be a little bit different on the female side. Might be a little bit different in the past for racial things, right? Was it Uhura from Star Trek was called by MLK? I forget the woman's real name. I apologize. Because she was going to quit when Gene Roddenberry was going to quit between season 2 and 3. And MLK calls her up and says, you can't quit. She says, why? He says, because I don't let my children watch television, but I let them watch Star Trek because you're on it. Because you look beautiful and you're sophisticated and you contribute a giant portion of what happens on the bridge. You're powerful. And so she stayed on the show. So in certain cases, it's more personal. But I don't think for the moon anyone's trying to defend the United States of America. On average. I know there's definitely some older farts that will do it. I've been told by people that went to war that more of the older Vietnam Wars, that it's a hell of a thing to enlist and defend your country, supposedly, but then to mature and find out that you were actually just killing people. Potentially for a bank, potentially just to empower the military-industrial complex, the war machine, the profiteering. You come home and you know that a bunch of people died. You saw pain and suffering on both sides of the fence. You do watch the news and you look backwards and you're like, oh my God, look what we did to this country. Now it's split in two. And now it's all unified. But in the end, you're like, we just created a mess over there. And so what do? Do you actually accept the fact it was a bad idea? What's very interesting is that I've seen and heard soldiers say, yeah, the Vietnam War was a bunch of bullshit, And then they'll say, but Jane Fonda was a bitch for going over during the war and sitting on some anti-aircraft thing. And so I'm kind of like, I don't know if I have an opinion, because you actually have to be there to understand what anyone's really trying to make a point about. But it seems almost like, it's like when I saw 9/11 happening, I was at Electronic Arts, and I forgot that that American kid who went over and joined the Taliban or whatever it was, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, right? There was a guy internally in my department, like a couple levels down, that was defending his choice. He says, you don't understand what America has done to these territories, and so, of course, they will do this. Now, in the end, when we all found out what was more true than false, it's kind of garbled in terms of where the accountability was joining ISIS, or okay, it was never going to be a good idea no matter what. Well, you find out that the whole thing was fake. It was all bullshit. And I took a strong public opinion against him in a kind of a friendly, it was like 2 or 3 people chainmailing in the department. He came in and defended, and then I basically pushed it in his face, like, you know, you against us or you for us, sort of thing. Not quite that poignant, but I was a dick. And after I left EA, I found the dude's email accidentally, and I sent him an email. And I said, you know what? You know, you were probably more in the right to be questioning what the hell was going on than me just biting it off and knee-jerking. And he was really cool about it, right? I would like to think that the amount of people who were rubbed out for the moon missions and for probably everything that's been going on at NASA since then is the smallest list in the litany of things that these folks have done against us, right? You know, Gus Grissom and his comrades in Apollo 1 launch, or test launch, being burned alive. Poisoned with cyanide and burned alive. Although I will say, it's really interesting. I don't understand. Bart Sibrel was on our show in season 3. I interview him, and he's like, oh yeah, it's completely a cyanide poisoning. And then, which makes sense. You don't want to actually make people suffer. You just need them out of your way. And then they lit this fire, and of course, no one tries to get out of the vehicle, which you would definitely try to get out of the vehicle. Imagine you're just sitting in your car, and just the atmosphere itself lights on fire. It's not a bomb that's blowing you up, right? There's explosive bolts, there's doors, there's all kinds of stuff to at least create some change in the state of the capsule. But if you're already dead, it makes complete sense with what he said. But I saw him re-interviewed about that, and he didn't mention that again. But he mentioned the fact he has sat down for, 8 hours or something with Gus Grissom's wife and son. So I don't know if he was able to, or if he felt more comfortable revealing that stuff to us and not to others. That could be the case. So we know that 3 people were rubbed out. Sometimes that's all you got to do. There's 3 people, and if anybody else is pushing on you or threatening to reveal something, you simply point and you go, okay, remember those 3 guys? Oh, well, they're just like you. They're no longer in this world. So make your decision. Oh, okay. I get you. But I also want to suggest that this whole area of truth is something that they fear. Why else would they put a lot of money into trying to make it look like it's legit? And you might say, well, it's to save reputation. It's to keep a $65 million a day organization going. And I wouldn't disagree. But I think on a deeper 5D chess situation, they understand that these are threads that you can pull out of the sweater. And the more you can pull out, the more you'll see. And the more you can see is the more that you can understand patterns. Lies that are patterns. They don't want the mechanism, the archetype of realizing patterns to be recognized. You know, they canceled the 2010 Tron Uprising off Disney+. I've talked about this a couple times. Why did they cancel it? Because it was winning awards. It was blowing away the fans. The reason why was that the writers were writing a script that basically said the many can defeat the few. Disney being a gigantic deep state control mechanism, probably a lot of other things too. Whatever audience they might happen to gather tends to attract a certain type of people. Okay? They can't have the kids of the world, a new generation growing up and believing in Bug's life, where the ants completely outnumber the grasshoppers. So they know, and don't forget this, because this is how fragile the situation is for them. They know that if the public were to ever grab a hold of one of these things, because there's been these, confessions, these deathbed confessions about the moon. People who worked in the set, people who were guards. One of them was a son of a guy, but got some details. Their explanation of the buildings and how the sets were built are completely new compared to all the other definitions and explanations that have ever been submitted, which, albeit many of them were submitted as educated guesses. But they know if one of these things comes through, the thing that Alex Jones is being sued perpetually for, this double jeopardy violation of this poor guy, they know that that was one of their biggest screw-ups in American history. He called it out. He's actually probably right. He probably is. I don't know what his details are versus the ones that I witnessed. But they know they screwed up, so they're trying to make it, they're protesting too much about this situation. For a guy having an opinion, right? So does Oliver Stone get, a $50 trillion lawsuit because he made the movie JFK? And he has an opinion that potentially someone was in the grassy knoll? Everyone who ever made Loose Change or Like Loose Change or whatever, all this stuff, did we all get sued because we happen to believe it's more based on physics than fantasy? What about me with all my moon mission stuff? Anyone who's ever commented in the comment section that was thumbs up to the moon idea, and everyone else who's marked several everybody, did we all get sued because we have an opinion? And somebody was offended? And then when do I get to countersue because I'm offended that you would be offended? It makes no sense. So they're trying to stamp the earth with these faux realities and then defend them in case anybody comes at them. And because AJ was so huge, AJ had a huge audience at one point, they realized this guy, love him or hate him, be him a Mossad agent or not, he could pull the actual thread completely out of the sweater. So much so that it's like a tug-of-war rope, and he could say, okay, guys, grab on. Keep pulling. And for every foot that comes out, I want another person on that rope, and we can yank this whole thing out. And these people will be exposed. Because you think about it, all the press gets in on it. The printed press gets on it, the televised press, the internet press. They stand in front of a school a quarter mile away while kids are getting killed, supposedly press. They're all in on it. They all stand to go down if he's ever able to expose it. So in terms of the complicity of pulling this off, and then you have a judge that says you're guilty from the day you walk into the court, and all you're here to do is to get your sentence and find out how much you owe. Well, that was a kangaroo court if there ever was one. So they also try to play sort of a reverse psychology game with the moon missions, which is they want to pretend like they don't care that you're stupid. Believe that, well, hey, I can't stop stupid, right? And at the same time, they spend millions and millions of dollars trying to convince people who have identified a piece of evidence that they really did go. I think that's absolutely hilarious. I mean, around 2005-ish, they came up with a whole wing on the website, which was to debunk each individual claim. Of course, selectively picking things that were easy to come up with a separate theory on. Hilarious, as we say on this show. One doth protest too much is such a powerful, powerful mechanism. Once you understand what that Francis Bacon phrase means, you'll start to see a lot of the world a lot clearer. Everyone has a friend or a family member or an associate that projects their internal anxieties and concerns. The classic one is, the guy who runs my smoke lounge does this all the time. This is a little bit personal, but it's when you have a bunch of guys come in to smoke cigars, and then a bunch of guys kind of start to amass in a room, and one guy, every single time they get a bunch of guys in the room, he starts talking about how everyone in the room is a homosexual. No one else was mentioning this subject matter whatsoever, but he always says it. It's when it hits a critical mass of individuals, he goes into this routine. And he doesn't realize that after year after year after year, we're all realizing that's probably what he is, because he can't stop talking about it. he's trying to say, oh, I'm not, you are, right? And it's just a very funny thing. So when the government starts protesting too much about what is real and what is not real, it started sort of super, suspicious. So hopefully you dug the conversation. Now, moving forward, I am looking for another place to actually record here locally, something that's going to be sort of long term, because I want to actually put my equipment at that location if all possible, which may not be possible because it's a lug fest unless I find a different way to move this stuff around, because I have to expand all the equipment and then shrink it down so I can store it in between. Sort of a pain in the ass, but welcome to the club, right? Yeah, so I'm looking for potentially one evening. There's a new smoke lounge. The guy would probably let me record there, but there's dudes who have keys, and so, I might have to sit around for a long time. And the other one is to make sure I could record inside during the wintertime if I could, because I don't mind recording outside, but I'll have to check with him. He just went on vacation. I've just sort of become a regular there. But there's a lot of sports televisions and that kind of stuff, so... Plus, I don't want to jeopardize any part of his shop or anything like that. Some other people have offered their homes locally. The challenge there is that there's too much interference. And when I lose my train of thought, it can be really dangerous when I'm doing a really cool thing. I like the coziness of being inside because it does really kind of juice the academic mind a little bit, where there's no interruptions that are interesting, right? Something happens outside that's really interesting, then that can be distracting. But anyway, this will definitely do for a while. I am working on some other episodes. Thought it would be a good time to actually stop and revisit the moon here real quick. But I missed last week. I apologize. I just literally got notice the day before I was supposed to record that everything was changing about that, because it's really sort of a personal thing, I think, with this guy. He's not even there at the time that we record our show on Sunday night, so sort of just being a dick for no fucking reason whatsoever, but whatever. Some people get that way. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. We've got everything up there. That's all I'm going to say. Do remember we have a store. The store will most likely move over the next couple months because the provider Spring Tea, they are being ridiculous. Okay. A t-shirt costs me $19.90 before you give me a dime. So they are highway robbery at this point. So there's a couple of places I'm gonna check out here. But anyway, for everybody on Patreon, PayPal, thank you so much. You make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.